Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I suggest we start. It's 10 o'clock. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, we do.
Thank you so much, Aisako. So, dear parties, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you to this information session. My name is Monika Stankiewicz, and I'm the Executive Secretary of the Minamata Convention Mercury. We are very happy to bring you this session, and we are very proud of the convention. While it is still a young convention, having entered into force in August 2017, it already has 122 parties, with new countries joining all the time. It is therefore a dynamic convention, and we are eagerly watching how parties are undertaking their obligations. In negotiating the convention, countries took a pragmatic life cycle approach to mercury management. They did not want to develop partial solutions. Rather, they took bold steps forward so that parties would commit to reducing the amount of mercury available for use and in global circulation. And one such bold step is the focus of today's session. The convention calls on parties to not allow the manufacture, import, and export of listed mercury-added products by this year, 2020. This obligation also pragmatic in that it does not call for those mercury-added products that are in use to stop being used. Also, it is life cycle based, since reducing the amount of mercury-added products will also reduce mercury waste. The Convention's financial mechanism, which includes the Global Environmental Facility and the specific international program, provides support to developing countries and countries with economies in transition for the implementation of obligations. There has already been significant support to many countries to inventory their mercury-added products and to develop their approaches to phase out. The Convention Secretariat is very pleased to be collaborating with many organizations, including fellow UN organizations like World Health Organization and International Labour Organization, other convention secretariats like BRS, NGOs, and multi-stakeholder partnerships, in particular the Global Mercury Partnership. And I would like to presence of representatives of these organizations during our session today. Together with the Convention financial mechanism, these organizations build a network of support for countries as they fully implement their obligations. In fact, one of these partners, the Natural Resource Defense Council, that developed major parts of the information we are presenting today, so I would like to thank them. Before I turn to the next presenter, my colleague Claudia Tenhabe, I would like to note this session is being recorded. We will take questions at the end of all the presentations, and you may also ask questions in the chat function. We will also be posting all our presentations on the website once this session has been finalized. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Monika, and good morning, good afternoon. Hello to everybody who's joined us today. Thank you very much. This is the first of the information sessions that we have prepared that focuses on implementation review and support. It is part of what we call a season of sessions that we are preparing that will pick up in September and will be complemented by another stream of sessions on mercury knowledge and science. And all of this is in parallel to the intersessional work that we are supporting parties and others with that has moved online because of the COVID circumstances. You might already have joined us for 2 sessions on aspects of effectiveness evaluation last month. And just to alert you, there's another session on Annex A and B next week as well. So this is also in parallel to this session. But back to today. The focus and the aim of the Secretariat in convening these sessions is to be there for parties and others to understand all of the provisions of our convention very well and to know the obligations and to be there to assist you to help or support as you may need. The focus today is specifically on the topic of the 2020 deadline as projected here, which means Article 4, Paragraph 1 on mercury-added products and its Annex A that is also a part of our convention text, of course. Our presentation is today divided into 3 sessions, and I'm very pleased to hand over in a moment to my colleague Marianne Bailey, who's our Capacity Building and Technical Assistance Officer, to walk you through the provisions of Article 4, Paragraph 1, and what it means in terms of the obligations that countries and parties have taken on mercury-added products. I'm then very pleased to hand over to Esa Kutoda, our program officer specific on science and technical matters, to walk us through what we know so far countries have notified, as well as what we know so far in terms of implementation of this particular provision. We are, of course, then happy to engage with you on any questions or comments that you may have afterwards. And as Monica said, we invite you to already, as we go along in today's presentation, record the questions in the chat, and we will come to them all together at the end. I'd also just like to draw your attention to the box at the bottom of this particular slide, and just to contextualize, where does this work fit that we are talking about today? Firstly, Article 4 contains other paragraphs, of course, as well, which also includes Article 4, Paragraph 8, and talks about the review of Annex A at a certain moment. And this review is, in fact, something that has been mandated by COP3 and will be the focus of the session next week. So we are not specifically dealing with that review in today's session. So if you have questions on that, please join us next week for our next session. I'd also like to draw your attention to Article 17, which is the information exchange article, because each party, according to that article, shall facilitate the exchange of information, including on mercury-added products. And this session and the other sessions and our role as Secretariat is to support you in that exchange, and therefore we welcome your questions, even amongst yourselves, or your comments in this regard as parties and others implementing the convention. This also links, of course, very closely to our Article 18, which is on public information, awareness and education. And lastly, I'd like to, and my colleague Esa will speak to it a bit more at the conclusion of the meeting, just recall Article 21, which is the article on reporting, where every party shall report on its measures it has taken to implement the provisions of the convention. And this article, Article 4, Paragraph 1, is one of them. The deadline is 2020. We are in 2020, so the deadline is this year. The reports on this provision are due at the end of December 2021, and we have highlighted that in gold, in Minamata gold at the end, but we'll walk you through that process until then. With that, let me hand over to my 2 excellent colleagues, Marianne, followed by Esa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Claudia and Monica. I am so pleased that so many of you could join us here today. As you can see from the outline here, this information session will cover the convention obligations to reduce mercury use in products, and it also covers the mechanism available to parties that want additional time to comply with the obligations. So these portions of the convention are, of course, found in Articles 4 and 6, as well as Annex A. And you can find a copy of the convention text easily on our website at www.mercuryconvention.org. But you do not need to have that in front of you as we go through these slides. So under Article 4, the convention will reduce mercury demand in products through a combination of measures which phase out mercury uses in many key products and phase down the mercury use in dental amalgam. Article 4 also discourages the manufacture of new products using mercury. In Annex A, Part 1, you can find a list of the mercury products subject to the convention phase-out obligations. And I've also listed these on the right-hand side of the slide. And that list will be repeated in subsequent slides, so don't worry, you don't need to memorize it right now. The list includes many batteries, switches, and relays, fluorescent lamps, cosmetics, pesticides, thermometers, blood pressure cuffs, and other measuring devices where mercury or a mercury compound is intentionally added to the product. The phase out applies to the manufacture, import, and export of the selected products, but it does not apply to their use. This means that mercury added products that are already in use and commerce can still be used within a country after the convention phase out date. This again is one of those examples of a pragmatic approach that the negotiators took to dealing with this issue. So the basic obligation is listed there on the bottom of the slide. Parties shall not allow, by taking appropriate measures, the manufacture, import, or export of mercury-added products listed in Part 1 of Annex A after the phase-out date specified for those products. And that's what takes us here to 2020. As Claudia mentioned, it is that deadline is upon us this year. I want to point out that mercury is used in some healthcare products, and WHO has done a tremendous amount of work on that topic, as have other partners. It's important, however, to note that many of the listings have details specific to the product category. So I'd like to cover that in the next slide. So the list in Annex A is mostly straightforward, but some of the product listings deserve a bit of explanation. So for example, in Annex A Part 1, the list includes all batteries except the button cells that are typically used in hearing aids. Those are zinc air batteries. And button cells used in watches. Those are silver oxide batteries generally. Mercury is sometimes used in these kind of batteries for corrosion control. So the convention allows for some mercury content, but the amount needs to be less than 2%. Most manufacturers already meet the 2% limit, or they produce mercury-free alternatives. So there should be very few difficulties for parties to meet this requirement. Most lamp categories listed in Annex A have mercury content limits. So the phase out applies only to lamps exceeding those limits. For example, in compact fluorescent bulbs, it's not for all CFLs, it's for those that are 30 watts and greater with a mercury content exceeding 5 milligrams per lamp burner. An exception to this content limit concept is in lamps is for high pressure mercury vapor lamps. For general lighting purposes, those need to be phased out entirely. Annex A also phases out the use of mercury in pesticides, biocides, and topical antiseptics. And mentioning biocides, I want to point out one important use, and that's mercury in paint. Historically, large quantities of mercury were used in paint to prevent growth of bacteria during storage and growth of algae or fungi after application of the paint. Another interesting product is cosmetics. An example of those are skin lightening creams and soaps. Those are covered if the mercury content is above 1 part per million. That concentration limit, which is applicable to all cosmetics under the convention, is intended to capture those cosmetics where mercury is intentionally added. So moving on to the phase out date, all the products listed in Part 1 of Annex A are subject to the same effective phase-out date, which is 2020. And note that it's written as a calendar date, so it doesn't change depending on when a government becomes a party to the convention. As mentioned earlier, Article 6 contains the mechanism by which parties can obtain an extension of time, and that'll be both country specific and product specific, and I'll explain that more in just a moment. I want to note that in order to get an exemption, a party has to submit that upon ratification or upon joining the convention. Notifications of the exemption are posted on the convention website, and they're limited to no more than 5 years, so that would be 2025. At that point, a party could request the COP to grant an additional 5 years. again, I'll cover that more in just a moment. So as we can see with this list, Annex A begins with a list of products used in special circumstances that may be excluded from the phase-out requirements. Products can fall outside of the phase-out mandate if any of the exclusions in this list apply. The list includes essential military and civil protection, such as police applications, but the term essential is undefined, so governments have some discretion to interpret that. Most products used by both the military and ordinary consumers may not be essential given the availability of non-mercury alternatives, or let's say in the case of lamps, lower mercury alternatives that would perform the identical function. But there may be unique types of products in these categories, such as special switches, where the mercury is needed because of the high stress application in which it functions. So that's what the negotiators had in mind with that entry on the exclusion list. Other exclusions can apply for research or replacement purposes. Measuring devices such as blood pressure cuffs may be an example where a small number of units may still be needed for use in research or calibration activities. And regarding replacements, there may be instances where non-mercury switches, relays, or measuring devices or lower mercury lamps of certain types are unavailable as a replacement component in a larger piece of equipment or machinery. A classic example of this is when you have a mercury switch that's made for a complex, expensive piece of manufacturing equipment, and the only switch made for it is a mercury switch. So the exclusion would allow the manufacturer or trade of the replacement mercury switch so that the expensive equipment can continue to be used. There is also an exclusion available for traditional or religious practices, and we're not aware currently of products listed in Annex A being used in this way. And the convention also exempts vaccines to maintain the availability of vaccines using a mercury compound as a preservative, particularly where refrigeration is unavailable in the developing world and elsewhere. So it's important for us to note that Annex A Part 2 focuses on the obligation to phase down rather than phase out the use of mercury in dental amalgam. The Annex lists 9 potential options that parties can take to implement this phase down. The approaches and authorities which may be required to implement these options vary widely depending on the option. For example, several of the options involve dental insurance. One restricts the use of mercury to its encapsulated form. Another option targets best environmental practices in dental offices. So that would typically call for amalgam separators to minimize mercury discharges into wastewater. So governments should consider the phase down options they wish to pursue and the authorities needed to implement the options chosen. In some cases, such as the promotion of research and development or education and training on mercury-free dentistry, a variety of approaches can be taken. And I would like to point out that at COP3 last November, the parties took a decision that encouraged parties to take more than the 2 required measures. So under paragraph 5 of Article 4, a party must take measures to prevent mercury-added products from being incorporated into larger products. For example, switches and relays, as we've said, are often components of larger products. So a measure might be that a party who manufactures larger products verifies that components like switches and relays that are used in it are the ones that are allowed under Annex A. So they might look at import controls, they might look at controls on the manufacturer. Similar issues could arise with respect to batteries and lamps identified for phase out in Annex A. That's something to keep in mind. And the convention requires that each party discourage mercury use in product types that are not previously known to the party when the convention entered into force for that party. except for cases in which a risk-benefit assessment of the product demonstrates an environmental or health benefit. So this could require an understanding of existing uses of mercury in products within the country. It could require a way to address new uses which may arise. So parties should look into collecting information on existing uses and addressing new uses. They can implement this obligation in a variety of ways. For example, they might choose to restrict or prohibit new manufacturing processes using mercury, perhaps with exemptions available for extraordinary situations to meet this obligation. But again, this can be implemented in a variety of ways. So to summarize, no manufacturer, import, or export of phased out products after 2020, dental amalgam phase down measures, prevent mercury components going into larger products, and discourage mercury added products that were previously unknown. I'd like to now move on to the exemption article, which is Article 6. So this provides a mechanism for parties to receive more time to meet their obligations under Article 4. So the exemption is only a limited extension of time for compliance. It's not an exemption from complying at all. That's important to note. The time exemptions are available only to the product and it also applies to processes, but we're not covering that here. So it's available only to the product provisions of the convention. And there aren't exemptions or extensions of time available for other convention obligations, for example, emissions control requirements, supply and trade, that type of thing. Article 6 is only for products and processes. It contains two separate procedures for an extension of time. The first is a simplified registration process, which can provide an extension of time until 2025 for products. This exemption expires at the end of the initial period. The second that a party could choose to seek is an extension that requires COP approval. So that could potentially provide an extension until 2030 for products. And that is only upon request by a party and subject to COP approval. No extensions of time are available beyond these dates, regardless of when a country becomes a party. So given that the second process is some years away, we're not really focusing on that in this session, looking really at the initial exemption registration process. So I want to point out again that a government must register for an exemption at or prior to the time of becoming a party, which is 90 days after after submitting its ratification or acceptance of the convention. For the many governments that ratified before the convention's entry into force, they need to register for the exemption at any point prior to entry into force, which was August 2017. If in the future the COP decides to amend the convention to add any products or processes to Annex A or B, a party would need to register for the exemption before such an amendment enters into force for that party. So I'd like now to turn, that was a very quick run through of Article 4 and Article 6. So I hope that was understandable enough. And I just want to go over that to register for an exemption, there are forms on the convention website. And you go to the convention tab and click on forms and guidance, and you can see there that the forms for registering exemptions for both products and processes are in the same document. So on the form, the party would specify both the product or the process category or subcategory in Annex A or B for which they're requesting an exemption. Again, we're not covering Annex B or Article 5 in this training, but the forms cover both. The registration has to be accompanied by a statement explaining the party's need for an exemption. And the format for the public registry is also found at the same website link. So just to summarize the information on exemptions, the duration of the initial exemption depends on two factors. One, when the government becomes a party, and two, whether the party requests an exemption for less than the 5 years. For countries that become parties after 2020, the registration exemption expires in 2025. The same date applies to all parties, regardless of when they became a party. Article 6 was drafted in this way so that the initial exemptions would be terminated by 2025 at the latest. Parties, again, can also request a duration shorter than the 5 years for one or more product categories covered by their registration. And that, I think, takes us through the basic obligations of Article 4 and Article 6. So now I'd like to turn this over to my colleague, Izaku Toda.
Thank you, Marianne. I took a bit of time to unmute myself. I am speaking to this section 3, and this is about the existing information that may be helpful to regulate mercury-added products to meet the 2020 deadline. If you can show the next slide. Yes, as Claudia mentioned earlier, Article 21 requires the parties to report on the implementation of the Minamata Convention, including Article 4. And I saw a question in the chat box: how many parties have already banned the manufacture, import, and export of Annex A products? And we will only know that after we receive the a report, Article 21 report from parties by the end of 2021, which is next year. So, is there not any information about the implementation? We have some information from the notifications. We have a website, a web page that lists contains all the formal notifications we received pursuant to specific articles of the convention. And particularly, these notifications includes those about the exemption pursuant to Article 6 and measures to implement the convention pursuant to paragraph 4 of Article 30. So if we look at the exemptions, we have received exemptions were registered by 11 parties, and I have seen a question from Thailand about the exemptions. Yes, we received the registration of exemption from Thailand, which extends the deadline of certain products until 2025. So the phase-out obligation applies to Thailand in this year. Some parties registered the exemptions for all the Annex 1 Part 1 products, and some parties registered exemptions for part of it. And for example, China registered exemption on the manufacture of clinical thermometers and specific manometers. So this means that the manufacture of the thermometers, these will be extended, but the import and export will stop this year, about the deadline 2020. I'm going to turn to the Article 30, paragraph 4, and this slide is too small for you to read, but this is just an example, 3 examples of the submissions from parties when they became parties: Canada, Japan, and Thailand, and they listed the domestic measures that were taken already when they became a party. So this kind of information may be useful for those parties who are going to implement Article 4 from now. And also from the European Union, we didn't receive the paragraph 4 notification, but we received the paragraph 3, the declaration about the competency of the European Union vis-à-vis the member states, and it includes the reference to EU Regulation 2017/852, which regulates the mercury-added products. And also, if we look at the Minamata Convention initial assessments, which are being produced or which have been produced, funded by the Global Environment Facility, some parties and countries have reported the plans for implementing the provisions. These MI reports that were submitted are already available on the website, and also we note that some projects funded by JEF or the specific international program address the Article 4. So we hope to receive some information, some more information from parties. The Secretariat has an obligation to promote the information exchange between parties and other stakeholders. Specific provision includes the Article 4, paragraph 4, which requests the Secretariat to collect and maintain information on mercury-added products and their alternatives on the basis of information provided by parties. And currently, information is being collected as part of the intersessional process on the review of Annexes A and B, of which we are going to talk in more details next week. But Article 4 is about parties, but Article 17 provides that Secretariat will enhance the information exchange with relevant organizations. So as we receive useful information about the mercury-added products, we have put such information on the website on information exchange. And also there are other information resources. And before going into talking about these information sources outside the convention, I think I have forgotten to mention the information already available on the website. One information is that in the previous slide I talked about the information exchange website, and we have at the bottom we listed the report on the mercury-added products that we received from the Ministry of the Environment of Chile. So this is one piece of information that we received from parties, and also in the process of the review of Annex A and B, we received information on the mercury inventory pursuant to the United States Toxic Substances Control Act, and also we received a report produced by the European Commission about mercury-added products. So these pieces of information may be useful for parties. And then my last slide is the other information sources just before that. So there are a bunch of information on the website of the UNEP Global Mercury Partnership. which is a voluntary partnership that works hand in hand with the legally binding Minamata Convention, and its product area is led by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and they have much information resources on their website. We also have WHO guidance on the thermometers and manometers. And NUMOA is that I think it is the Northeast Waste Management Officers Association in US. They have a good website on mercury-added products, and Zero Mercury Working Group has a series of information. And the European Environment Bureau, Zero Mercury Working Group, and NRDC published a guide and checklist for phasing out mercury-added products. So these are available from these links. So this is it, and I'm going to hand this over to my colleague Claudia Tenhafe, who's going to guide us through the question and answer session. Thank you. Claudia, you're muted.
That's it. I'm still learning all the buttons. Thank you very much, Marion. Thank you very much, Esako. There's a lot of information to go through. Some parts are, of course, quite technical. Some parts are quite detailed, but we are very grateful for your time that you're joining us today, and also for all of the different questions that are coming in. Some Esako has already started to, but with your permission, I've kind of grouped them together. And so Marianne, Esako, I'll give them to you in thematic groups once again, and you could then fill in some of the details. So may I first just take Gilbert's question, or bring Gilbert's question to your attention, which is about the financial mechanism and the support that is given to countries in terms of meeting this obligation. And Gilbert writes, the financial mechanism of the convention aims to assist developing countries and countries in transition to fulfill their obligations. The financial mechanism, of course, consists of the GEF on the one hand and the specific international program on the other. He further writes, to date, many African countries that are parties might not have requested the cessation of the continuous use of mercury-added products as outlined in Part 1 of Annex A beyond 2020. And so the question is, what concrete support is envisaged for those parties? So may I just draw Gilbert's attention to the comment, the highlight made by Esako, of course, that almost all African countries that have applied for have been supported with Minamata initial assessment reports to assess their readiness for meeting this particular obligation. So that is, of course, a very important information source for us to assist countries, and in this case, African countries, to know more. But if I could maybe just hand over to Marion in particular, just to speak a little bit to the support that the GEF gives, and also to the support that the CIP has already given at least one country in terms of products. Marion. Now, Marion, you are on mute.
Sorry, I got the button colors mixed up. It has to happen in every webinar, doesn't it? I would note that the Global Environment Facility is already in its 7th replenishment period and halfway through it with a number of mercury projects. I don't have a breakdown of to what extent those projects cover mercury-added products, aside from the Minamata initial assessments that both my colleagues mentioned. But the Global Environment Facility is doing a great deal of support to the convention. I would also point out that the specific international program that we run here from the Secretariat has a number of projects that cover mercury-added products. We are in the implementation of round 1 of the specific environmental program, of which there are 5 projects, a number of which cover mercury-added products. And in the second round of the SIP, which we use as the acronym, the SIP, there are 10 projects, some of which cover mercury-added products. We don't have the third round scheduled yet, but it will take place at some point soon, and the information on that is on our website. So we would be happy to take questions from others by email or conversations with the Secretariat to follow up on this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. And just to add, we know that some African countries are working currently with UNEP, United Nations Environment Programme, on project in this now upcoming replenishment round that looks at health products in particular. In other words, mercury-added products in the health sector, which is, of course, one of the very, very big areas. Isako, I don't know if you would like to add a line still from your perspective on this, but that is one of the concrete ones that I know is in development. If you have specific questions about that, we are very happy to put you in touch with our colleagues at UNEP in this regard. But Isako, do you want to add something onto this, or can I? Otherwise, I move on to the next question.
Please move on. I don't have any particular.
Perfect. Okay, now I'm going to go a little bit more and take the questions that are the nitty-gritty questions, but very important for countries to know, for parties to know. Firstly, I'd like to bring to you the question from Teraporn from Thailand, just to confirm that Article 4 does not prevent the party to use the mercury-added product until it has become end of life. So she would like to have a confirmation on that Article 4 is not about not being able to use the product until that time. And as she pointed out, and as Isako showed us on the file, Thailand has applied for an exemption according to Article 6. And so according to that, Thailand would have this until 2025. But Marianne, if I can maybe just ask you to confirm for Thailand that it would allow the party, any party for that matter, but certainly for Thailand, to still use these products until end of cycle, please.
That's absolutely right. So it doesn't cover the use, and the exemption would take you through 2025 if the party requested it until 2025. A party could request an exemption that is shorter than that, but not longer than that. I would point out too that while the obligation does not cover use, it covers manufacturing, import, and export. Some countries may decide, as they are beginning to implement this obligation or planning how to do so, they may decide that for some or all categories of mercury-added products, they would like to take some measures on the use. In other words, for some parties, it may make sense to have a program that means that the end-of-life issues with respect to waste management of the mercury-added products would not come upon them in such a dramatic way if all products were allowed to just reach their end of life. So there may be a category of products that a party would decide to, of its own volition, just have a use restriction on. But that would be very much up to the party. The convention does not call for that.
Thank you very much, Marion. Isako, if I may give you the next question, and if you wanted to add anything else at the time, which is Ram is asking about the deadline for 2020. That is, of course, now upon us, and just perspective of how are we, do we know how we stand in terms of this deadline? How well are we progressing? How many countries have, in fact, put in place what they need for this obligation? Can we speak to that already a bit? Isako, over to you.
Yes, as I said in my presentation, we will need to wait for the 2021 reporting to have a full picture. But of course we know that there are some parties have already taken measures, such as Canada, Japan, and so on, which are already in the third paragraph Article 30.4. Notifications, and also we are going to look into the MIA reports and look at the implementation status of parties, but we are not in a position to report on that because it takes a bit of time to go through all the reports. Thank you.
I found the button. Thank you very much, Eisaku. Just to note, I noticed that some participants may be raising their hand. For everybody to be able to read the questions, may I invite you kindly to write your question into the chat. It is easier for us to manage and also for the other participants to hear, to capture well what you'd like us to respond for. So I know there are at least 2 that are hoping to raise their hand, but just for the formality of this online meeting, we would kindly request you to write your question, if possible, in the chat. Otherwise, we'll reach out to you afterwards to try to capture all of that. I move along now to another set of questions, and there was one question about how would you view the possibility of countries to register an exemption of a process, and in this case, the process of gold plating in Nepal. Marian, could you kindly just address what the exemption is used for and what not, and maybe also the topic of newer areas of work for the convention? Please, over to you.
That's a challenging question. I think the gold plating process, it's not listed specifically. I hesitate to answer thoroughly because this is not something that the negotiators were focused on at the time, as far as I know, but it would not likely fall into the category of mercury-containing products. I think, Eisaku, did you want to add something on that?
Yeah, please, Eisaku.
Thank you, Marianne. So, as Marianne mentions, the gold plating is not regulated under Article 4, Article 5. So, of course, the parties have opportunities for participating in the review process of the Annex A and B, which is which we are going to speak to next week. Thank you.
Yeah, indeed. This session is now only about the products. It is not at all about processes per se. So please dial in next week, and especially it's not yet about any additions or any new items that the family of the convention would take upon itself as an obligation. So in terms of gold plating, please come to our meeting next week, and we'll be able to hopefully shed a bit more light on the thinking of parties in that direction. I would also like to just recognize that Moldova has brought to our attention some of the good work they've done in terms of putting legislation together in terms of a chemical law and also a water law, a waste law, etc. So all of this information, whatever we are able to put on our website, as we have also shared information put forward by Chile also, please send it to us, Moldova, and all the others as well, because I think it is always a very important a part of keeping the family of the convention informed and involved with what others are doing, and in fact how, and maybe even reach out in terms of how they're doing that. So thank you very much, Moldova, for bringing that to our attention. I have one more question, which is one of those complicated ones and is a bit tricky, so let me read it to both of you. And it is about exemptions again in terms of Annex A. Are the exemptions allowed for phase-out dates, or are they permanent exclusions? And then also to speak in terms of the exclusions that we have currently on research purposes, vaccine, traditional and religious practices. I just want to say it is not our intention as Secretariat to interpret the text of our convention or to foresee or to foreshadow what the convention, what the COP may want to decide in the future. But so we can only answer what we know now in terms of the convention text. But Esako, Marian, whoever would like to maybe speak to that in terms of the conventions, if the exclusions are permanent. May I leave that with you? Either of you?
Thank you. Thank Claudia. If I may, the exemptions and the exclusions are different. If you look at the Annex A part 1, there's an exclusion of the vaccines and so on. This is permanent, as it were. Of course, if the Annex A is not revised, this is permanent, as it was. So exclusions are permanent, but exemptions are only time bound, which is only until 2025, unless COP agrees to the extension of another 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esako. Marian, would you like to say something?
No, I don't have anything to add. That was
okay.
Just right.
Perfect. Okay. I also just wanted to record that, in fact, I was just informed that the UNEP project that is being worked on and that includes a number of different African parties is in collaboration, of course, with the WHO. So it is indeed a partnership with the UN's health agency, and it is on cosmetics, medical devices, and dental amalgam. So if you should want more information on that, we are happy to put you in contact with our colleagues Ken and Ludo for your information. But I now look at the time, and we are just 8 minutes away. If there are any other questions that you may have, please feel free to write them into the chat box. We will make this presentation available, or the slides will be available, so you could go through them at your leisure again. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to write to us. I do want to bring a question or a comment to Esako's attention that came in right at the beginning, and I haven't forgotten about it. I kind of left it a bit to the end, which was in terms of maybe there are some medical devices that are not currently on the list and that should be on the list. And of course, all of these are going to be discussed much more next week. But Esako, if I could maybe just bring to your attention a comment made by Lisa, which is a medical device that it contains quite a significant amount of elemental mercury that is not included, which is sleep test kits, etc. So I was wondering if you had anything that you could share with us in terms of that type of device and the discussions on any review of the annex. Over to you, Esako.
Thank you, Claudia. And as a technical official, I very often receive questions about specific products and questions whether this is product control under Annex A, and we always say that we are not in a position to interpret that text, and it is up to the parties that shall not allow the use, and the parties should define the product. So I think I have to I need a bit of time to understand what the sleep test kit is, and if it is about the mercury switches included in the device, then it is partly under the Annex A, and it is the incorporation of switches into larger product. But I think I have to look at some details in order to be able to respond to this question. And if this is not included in Annex A, this is an issue of the review of Annex A and B. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to put one more. I have two more questions that have just come in case any of you have more, please do record them. But two questions that have come in. The one is just to go back to the exemptions. So Marian, if I could ask you again, just to outline how does Article 6 work? What exemptions can you ask for or register for? And most importantly, when do you have to do it? Because it's a critical time point when it has to be done. Otherwise, it's a sort of it doesn't happen again, at least under the current text of the convention. So Marion, if you can maybe just clarify that one, because it's an important one for all from now on, of course, future parties. Thank you very much.
Sure, I'm happy to. I think part of the question was about what are criteria for exemptions. For a party's initial request for an exemption, it is not criteria that is asked for in the form, but rather it is an explanation. So it is up to the party to describe the reasons the exemption is being asked for. It's a bit different for an extension of the exemption, which we're not really covering in this session. And again, the party must register for an exemption at or prior to the time of becoming a party. So that's 90 days after submitting the ratification or acceptance of the convention. After that, there would not be an ability to request an exemption. Hope that answers the question, but if not, happy to follow up.
Thank you, Marion. It is indeed very important to really read Article 6 as a very specific thing that happens in the either life of the convention, in other words, before the convention itself came into force, because it had to await 50 ratifications, or also in relation to a country's relationship with the convention. In other words, these papers have to be handed in at the time of ratification. It is not possible afterwards. And we realize that some countries may have waited with their ratification to ensure that everything is in order on their side beforehand. So we know that that has happened. And if you are a country intending to become a party and this is your situation and you would like to have extra advice also, please do just reach out to us and we shall be happy to help you. If you are in the process of trying to fill in those forms for your country in preparation of ratification and coming on board inside the family, and you'd like to look at some of the other ones, as Isako pointed out, we have all of the notifications in that regard are on our website, and you could have a look at how other countries have formulated the need for requesting for Article 6 treatment. We have only 3 more minutes left, and there are 2 questions and I would like to hand back to Monica Stankiewicz, our Executive Secretary, just for the closing note. But can we say anything in terms of the online market, or Marion, the online market on cosmetics that allow mercury? Is there something we can say on that topic? And very shortly, do we know of facilities in the CEE region or in Europe that accept metallic mercury as such thermometers for final disposal? Can I leave those 2 very quickly with you before we close the session? Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. This is a very challenging question on the online market, and we have not yet looked into that issue very carefully, but we already note on that issue in a different area, which is the trade of mercury itself. So we are in contact with the trade authorities and police authorities about how we can handle the trade that are done through the online trading, and this is we think that this is a great implementation challenge. Thank you.
I see Elena just made a comment about the great work that, in fact, I'd like to just recognize that the great work that Zero Mercury and others are doing to try to bring information of this regard forward. So if you would like to have specific other information of how they were doing it, just go visit the Zero Mercury Working Group website and there will be some information there. So just a bit of headline there. Otherwise, may I invite Monica to close for today? We will, just to say, we will have another session of exactly the same kind later today, and we look forward to having you or your other colleagues with us then. Thank you very much. Monica, please.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank all the participants for being with us for this past hour. I hope you have found it full for your work on the convention. We will look through the questions you have submitted in the chat box again, and for any question that has remained unanswered, we will write down the answer. So all the presentations and the additional answers as we may provide will be posted on the website. There will be another session as mentioned by Claudia, so you are welcome to join that one as well if you can, as we may expect different kind of questions to be asked and answered. And we would also very much welcome your feedback on the quality of the sound and your possibility to hear well. We will be sending a survey to everyone, so please take a moment to respond to the survey as we aim to make those webinars as of good quality as possible, and as we will be having a number of them during this year. So it's important we ensure that everyone have a good possibility to connect and to hear well. But I would at the end also like to thank my colleagues for the very substantial preparation for the session. This topic is a complex one and theme, but I would like to congratulate my colleagues for doing a really good job, and we are always happy to follow up also in between webinars. So whatever question you have, just send us an email and we will always reply. But with that, I think we can close the session. Thank you so much and see you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.